Tony, I think we're good. All right, folks. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Feel free to funnel into the seats, the folks in the back. There's plenty of room. I promise you that we do not bite. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justin Eimers, and I work for the U.S. Army Program Executive Office for Command Control Communications Tactical, or PEO C3T, at Aberdeen Proving Ground. So I'll just be moderating today's panel on increasing cyber-electromagnetic readiness. The panelists who I'll introduce in just a second are our resident cyber experts from both the PEO C3T and Army Futures Command, and they'll cover some various CEMA-focused topics ranging from a broad look at the service's cyber strategy to a look at some things as far as cyber that are affecting the tactical network and the path forward for collecting and digesting some of that data as it relates operationally. So we'll take about 30 minutes to kind of talk about those topics, and then we'll switch to a Q&A, and I'll just be kind of scribbling down some questions to ask the panel first, and then we'll open it up to you guys to ask some questions at the end. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists here. So to my immediate right is Dr. Portia Crowe. She is the S&T Cyber and EW Advisor for the Network Cross-Functional Team. To her right is Ms. Shannon Jones. Shannon is the NetOps and Cybersecurity Branch Chief for Project Manager Tactical Network. And last but not least is Mr. John Keenan, who is the Chief Engineer for Mission Command Cyber. So at the very end, we'll stick around for a bit, and we'll be meeting with you guys one-on-one for a couple minutes, so feel free to come on up after we're done here. But with that being said, Dr. Crowe, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me? Am I okay? Yeah? Okay. All right, great. So I just came on board to the Army Futures Command Network cross-functional team up at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, just north of us here, probably about a month ago. Oh, actually, it was April Fool's, so I don't know if that was. We actually didn't plan it that way, but we'll see. So I am General Gallagher's Science and Technology Advisor, as well as Cyber and EW Advisor. The Cyber and EW piece I took from my previous job, where I worked at PEO C3T for General Bassett, looking across the portfolio, really 24 critical technologies on the network, as well as securing the network itself. So in my new role, one of the most pressing efforts that we have ongoing is to modernize the network, right? And so part of that is taking into account cyber, electronic warfare, and our 4 key lines of effort. So the 4 key lines of effort, and pardon me if you guys have heard this already, but I'll do it again. The first one and priority is unifying the network. The second is common operating environment. The third is joint interoperability and coalition. And the fourth is command post survivability and mobility. And so what we've decided to do as a strategy is to look across those 4 lines of effort and come up with capability sets so that we can deliver everything integrated as a package, because it's not just one program office. It spans across multiple program offices. So we are delivering them in capability sets starting with really now, but 21, 23, and every 2 years. And then within those 2 years, we're rolling in software capabilities in increments based upon what we can do in certain time frames. So we're not waiting until 2 years to roll in technology. We've got a rolling kind of baseline to make sure that we keep upgraded. So under unifying the network, Shannon will talk more in that lane. So we've got a lot of threat briefs and a lot more understanding going through experimentations. So NIEs, kind of the last one that we did was end of last year. There's a lot more exercises and a lot more units that we are embedded with and understanding how they operate as far as training goes, what cyber threats that they're looking at, their EW. We've got heat maps on EW to see what our spectrum looks like. So We're doing a lot more with units, which is really fun part of this job because you can really get the soldiers' input, not just on what they're seeing in their foxhole, but also where they're deploying and some of the geographical threats that are happening. So besides talking about just the network, right, we also want to talk about what rides on the network. So the application, software, that's where we talk about common operating environment, where we're taking a lot of our legacy, disparate systems that have unique software and hardware, and we're converging them onto certain platforms, depending on where we are in the echelon. And so part of that effort, we've got, in the tactical space, we've got command post computing environment, we've got mobile handheld, which is part of the Net Warrior program, and then we've got mounted, which is programs like JBCP, Blue Forest Tracker. And so as we look across the cybersecurity footprint of all of those CEs, we're looking at things like how can we do faster kill chain cycles. So how can we make more rapid decisions in that space, get it to the user in a way that makes sense without him going through a lot of data, and then how can we make it actionable? And so part of our push this year is to come up with a data convergence strategy that allows us to do that. So instead of looking at it by domain, so by fires and intel and ops, we're trying to converge and take a lot of that data, and common data fabric is probably a word that you might have heard in industry. How do we converge that data in a way that we can clean it, we can run models off of it, and we can make it actionable? So we've got some really key work groups and summits coming up this year, led by Network CFT with our partners in acquisition as well as science and technology. So what I'd like to say is that we're bringing the network together, not just from a threat perspective, but also from a mission space, and we're doing full spectrum awareness. And so you'll hear John talk a lot about what we're doing in cyberspace in terms of situational understanding. So bringing those disparate pieces, whether it's NetOps, Spectrum, Intel, and fusing that data in a way that makes sense for our operators so that the CEMA work group and the CEMA cell can use that data in a way that's intelligible. Another push that we have is looking at cloud technologies. So cloud computing, I know we're making a lot of strides with our industry partners and on the S&T side, is, again, looking at what do we need locally in our echelons and to support the brigades and below, and what can we put in a cloud environment more at the enterprise. So looking at how do we do faster orchestration? How can we patch faster, right? So we know that we've got systems out there and software out there that we probably need to be patching more often. So how can we get quicker in that cycle? So what can we put in the cloud environment that makes sense, and what is that smaller footprint that we can put locally, because we don't believe everything should be in the cloud. But distributed mission commands is more of the way that we're going. And so whether it's cloud solutions or whatever that solution is, that's really what we want to get to. Increase cybersecurity, lessen our training burden, and make cyber just part of what users do, soldiers do, right? And not make it so cumbersome. And looking at the logs of what a lot of those tools generate, it will give us a lot more forensics. And so cloud computing with some of the AI technologies that we're looking at is really going to be key to getting there. So I won't really touch on CyberSU. I'll let John do that, but we've got a really good program and a way ahead for that. Last thing I'll really say on the S&T side is that not just the C5 ISR Center that we have at APG, but we've also reached out and working with AFCEA in Austin, going out to academia. A lot of the universities that we have here on the East Coast, the West Coast, in the middle, of the country has been phenomenal. I mean, so we're looking at how do we start to bring the earlier S&T technology into the programs of record, looking at experimentation, so what can we put in the hands of the soldiers quicker and faster, and then get it into acquisition, which is really the programs of record, so that we could start to field things a lot faster. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Jones. As Justin mentioned, I work for PM Tactical Network. What we do at PM Tactical Network is we build the network and the network transport for the tactical command posts, from battalion to brigade to division to corps, headquarters, and other ancillary units in the military or in the U.S. Army. So that includes the classified and unclassified networks, the telephony systems, and the satellite and line of sight transmission systems that they use to backhaul those communications. And on top of that, there's the element of defense of that network, of that transport. Over the years, that has, of course, morphed and changed in more ways than I can adequately describe. But it came from just defending the network to now defending the data that's on the network, and now to making our waveforms more resilient, because we're aware that there's lots of jamming capabilities out there and lots of efforts underway to disable those transmissions. So we've got a huge spectrum of threat on our plate that we're all trying to figure out ways to combat and make the network trustable and usable for those commanders that are trying to conduct their missions. I want to touch on something that Portia triggered, which was the capabilities integration of all this. With all of that broad spectrum of things that we're trying to do, taking the network security and the endpoint security and the transmission security and all the things that do those disparate tasks and actually integrating them into an intelligible picture is a challenge, particularly in the tactical environment. If you are not familiar with the tactical environment, you have to imagine that we have 200 plus disparate, disseminated, small wide area networks operating off somewhere by themselves that we then have to tie into larger networks and get to the information that may reside, here in the continental United States or elsewhere. And each of those discrete wide area networks has to have its own capability to do all the things that they need to do to support mission and do the cyber defense. So it's a very disseminated environment. When you consider the things that we need to build into those networks to make them resilient, I have to build 200 plus instances of that times classified network, unclassified network, and transport network. So, it gets very large in scale when we start talking about what we have to design into this and how many instances we have to propagate of it. And that's 200 WANs, but that's over 5,000 discrete network nodes for each of those battalion and company and division and brigade command posts. So it's pretty large in scale and pretty different from large enterprise environments. So I do the network management and cybersecurity piece for that. The interesting thing is that so often we talk about network management in a separate conversation as the cybersecurity element, when in fact cybersecurity is just an element of network operations. And getting that integrated as well to where it used to be install, operate, maintain the network. Now it's install, operate, maintain, and defend the network. And getting all of that, again, integrated so that the network management systems and those logs and those things that we're looking at just to do basic troubleshooting also have some kind of element that's analyzing those for disparate behaviors, things that might indicate that something more might be wrong than just, you might have a bad configuration here. So we don't have that capability in those formations today, right? They're still spinning a lot of cycles trying to figure out what's going on, and it might take them longer to actually discover that there's something malicious occurring, within their environment. And knowing that those malicious things can kind of sit and fester for some time, we are very focused on trying to eliminate the ability to laterally move, because that's where they're able to wreak havoc. So we kind of take the approach of assuming they're going to get there somehow, and then building on top of that to make sure that when they do get in, they can't laterally move. Some of the things that we're focused on at present is more robust endpoint security. This is kind of driven from the fact that, it used to be that we were securing from the network standpoint, and our firewalls and our IDS, sensors were telling us where the bad things were. Well, now everything's getting encrypted at the application, and your firewalls aren't necessarily able to see all that unless you do some weird things to enable them to break encryption. So we're now focused a lot on really making sure that the endpoint, has an ability to not just detect, but there's a measure of response when things are detected. Because again, if I'm a user and I've got thousands of endpoints, I'm not necessarily going to see some alert or log that looks funny. I need the smart applications and the smart systems to be doing that for me, and then telling me when it's quarantined something and say, okay, you might want to look at this. So we're looking at a lot of those capabilities, as Portia mentioned, AI, machine learning. The other things we're trying to do are to really kind of look at where the trade space is, because we can load all sorts of this stuff into the network, but for the tactical user, it gets very big and hard to manage. So where we can gain efficiencies for, again, integrating these capabilities, so they're looking, at one thing that's maybe managing many things, just makes it easier for those operators who have really big jobs to do. And then, of course, we're, tying into what John is going to talk to you about, taking all of those things that we're collecting, all of the logs and all of the events that may be happening on the network. And first of all, we don't have the on-prem storage to really collect all that forever. So to have the ability to look at all that stuff, define what's useful and not useful, throw out what's not useful, and focus on what's useful right on-prem is one of the things that we really need to do. And then when all those things are identified, turning it into what's actionable information and how is this affecting my mission environment. And that's the things that we have to work with John on in the Cyber-SU, which is where we're going with the future. We're kind of the present, and he's the future where we're taking this. So I guess I'll hand it off to you with that.
Thank you. So I'm John Keenan. I'm the chief engineer from Mission Command Cyber. So so listening to both Shannon and Portia speak, I wanted to kind of tailor my conversation to that and try not to speak with too many acronyms. So we have two programs. One is in the area of defensive cyber operations, and the other one is the Cyber-SU. Defensive cyber operations would be your typical CEMA capability of taking in information from all your disparate hosts and from the network as well. In this case, it'd be the local network that our Mission Command and enterprise applications reside on within the tactical environment. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I think most people are familiar with that capability. What we're going to talk about today is a little more in what we've been alluding to is Cyber-SU. Cyber-SU is challenging because, as Shannon just did a great job describing, is all the challenges from just a network perspective and all the possible pieces of information and then underneath that is the routing and all the capabilities that the network could provide. There's a lot of information, a lot of data that we could bring together in order to paint some sort of picture for a decision maker. It might mean a lot to somebody that works in networks to piece together all this information, but what does it mean to say a brigade commander? So we sit on that server stack with the other enterprise applications and the mission command applications that ultimately is going to inform the commander on what we're calling the key cyber terrain. So that includes network feeds. It includes intel feeds potentially down the road. It includes the DCO capabilities, the information on the electromagnetic spectrum, and the mission command applications that I spoke of. And then there's also there's a social aspect to it as well. So all that information, the challenge that we're facing is what's the so what to the commander. There's a CEMA working group. Of course, the commander's not doing this on his own. So there's the S6, and there's all those. There's the EW, the EWO. There's of course the G2 and S2. So they're going to have all those resources in terms of people, but how do we take that information from an automated perspective and provide something that the commander would like to basically, if there's an action to take, what information would we take from all these data sources to provide to the commander from an actionable perspective? So just stepping back to what we have done today, we've been working with Futures Command. They have some capabilities where they're taking the defensive cyber operations and adding a layer to it where they can start saying, okay, what are the dependencies on the infrastructure that those applications would have? So what we call that is we're calling that mission mapping. So now we're starting to map warfighting functions to the infrastructure and trying to do the best we can in terms of determining what those interdependencies would be on the infrastructure. From there comes the hard part of determining what the impacts are to those warfighting functions. So we've, about a month ago, we did brief industry on what we're going to do with a challenge-based acquisition to go after trying to get some applications or some capability that would be able to correlate some of the event data and help us define and then further come out with our first iteration in 22 of what we're calling Cyber-SU. So the way I see it is it has to understand what a warfighting function is. It has to understand its underlying infrastructure. It needs to understand the state of a mission at some point, because if it's going to do anything actionable, it's going to have to have knowledge of all those different key components. To me, this is a huge challenge, and what we're looking at right now is we're going to bite this off into chunks, and our first chunk is what we're calling See Yourself, which is what the capability is going to be in 22. So that includes integration with CPC, ingesting data that Shannon had mentioned, also our EW information, as well as information on the network health. Ultimately, and then in 22, we're going to jump to See Your Battle Space, which would be bringing in additional running estimates for the CEMA information, as well as integrating some threat intelligence into that common operational picture or CEMA tool for the commander. And then ultimately we get to, while we're continually improving on the first two areas, getting to the point of understanding the battle space. And we're targeting sometime out in 24 where we start talking about things like the red order of battle, synchronizing cyber targets, and orchestrate delivery of effects. So that's essentially a very high-level overview of what we're calling Cyber SU. I think we can open it up for questions at this point.
Sure. All right. So thanks to the panelists. So I'm just going to ask them a couple questions that I scribbled down just listening to them here. And they're for everyone, not just each individual person, so feel free to jump in at any point. The first one, actually, John, I'll kind of direct it to you being the Cyber SU guy, but I know Portia and Shannon can jump in too. You talked about the relationship between defensive cyber and Cyber SU somewhat separately and then tied it together talking about the interdependencies and impacts. But can you kind of talk about what the relationship is between them?
Sure. So with the defensive cyber operations, it really is a cyber tool. There's plenty of commercial products and industries. We share a lot of the same problem space with industry in terms of problems that they would have with networks, problems that they would see with, say, operating systems like Windows. There's a lot of commercially available tools that can enter into that space and that we can easily integrate into our environment. The challenge comes in Cyber SU because we have a unique environment, because now we're throwing in warfighting functions and the commander's view and the dependency on that infrastructure. So it's in that next step that is where a lot of the differences come in with Cyber SU and DCO.
All right, thanks, John. So this one, I promise, is for everyone. So what are some of the technical challenges for implementing all of these cyber tools or making sense of this cyber environment in a tactical space? And I'll leave that for everyone.
Okay, I can start with that. Actually, that comes with one of the things John mentioned, which is kind of see yourself, right? So I'll be completely honest with you. There's a lot of government-developed applications on this network, a lot of commercial applications on this network, and some of knowing that you have a problem is knowing what you're supposed to look like. And that sounds simple, but it's not. I would say we don't necessarily even know, what exactly is going on in the network when it's behaving normally, to be able to tell the deltas, again, which is where we need the smart, applications to where we can get that baseline and say, this is normal, and then point out where the abnormalities, start to occur. So getting to that place with all of the things that we have going on the network, it's mind-boggling sometimes, all the things that we have to integrate and make work together. And it doesn't always work together, right? So, APIs are huge. Open standard, systems, we're really, not favor, we don't favor proprietary protocols and things like that can't nicely communicate with other systems, because you're not going to be the only vendor on our network. It's never going to happen. So it's got to be open, or at least be able to communicate through an API of some type. And particularly in the cyber environment, getting all that stuff from disparate products into a common environment where you can do the holistic type of analysis is going to be so key.
So I know you asked technical, but it's not just technical, right? So we have policy concerns, we've got authorities concerns, and we're, the great thing about what we are doing is that we are not alone in cyber threats, right? Joint has problems, the industry's got problems, right? Even us sitting in here, we've all been hacked at least once or twice, right? So, or many, many more. But I will say technically, because of the environment that we operate in, which are, if we think brigade and below, we don't necessarily are connected all the time, right? So we work in latency environments, we're disconnected. So how do we get enough information that we can make sense of it? So having lightweight apps or lightweight models for AI and deep learning, we really have to think our way through that, where we put that, what that means to the soldier. So if they need, what is the critical element or data that they really need at the edge, as opposed to you're sitting in a fiber building, right? And you can get a lot of data coming off a nipper, SIPR. We've got data classifications that we're looking at, so we like to overclassify data. I would even think so even in the cyber area, because time to live for that type of data, could be used against us in forensics analysis that we store in databases for a very long time. And then we have data that is a very short time to live, right? So maybe we don't really need to overclassify it, and, we can, do you want me to smile? And so I think data classification is, especially as we move towards the mission partner environments and a lot of the exercises that we're doing. And that's why experimentation for us in the cyber and EW area is so critical, right? Because we get to understand, we get to take the threats that are really happening in the world, whether that's, to pick your country, and get to experiment. Do we have the right tools? Are our soldiers trained well enough to use these tools, right? And then we can bring in our industry partners, and they help us. And we do these quick turnaround DevOps iterations so that we're working with the soldier. We're like, can you see yourself properly, right? So whether you want to call it, whether it's NetOps or Cyber-SU, can we see the picture? And most importantly, how does that really impact the mission? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the cyber aspect. It's the units have to do a mission, and how is cyber threats or EW threats affecting that mission, right? So I would say we've got network challenges. We're working through some of the data classification issues that we have. I would say that we are so used to being connected, right? But what happens when we disconnect and we go in like airplane mode, I feel lost, right? So we have to think through that. So you can only do minimal things when you're in airplane mode. But imagine if you're a soldier at the edge and you're like, I don't know if my end user device went down because of a cyber threat, or was it just malfunctioning, right? So these are the things that we're trying to get the Cyber-SU, and we're moving towards the future with Army Cyber Command and the Center of Excellence in Augusta, really trying to wrap our arms around this. And it's moving very quickly, right? The threats are evolving fast. They're using our tools against us, right? I mean, they have Splunk, they've got Security Onion, they've got Endgame, they've got all the same tools that we get here. They have it too, but they're just using it very differently against us. So I think together as a community, we are learning more. We're sharing a lot more data, and hopefully I do believe that we're getting there. And I think programs like Cyber-SU, information warfare, the concepts that we hear as senior leaders talk about. It's not just cyber, right? We got to take the cyber, we got to take the network, we got to take EW, we got to package all this together with the threats and understand the entire space.
So those are just a few of the challenges, right? So there are some. But I want to give you guys some time to ask some questions, too. There is a microphone right there in the middle, so feel free to take turns, and we'll ask some questions here for our panel.
Hello. Thank you for your presentations. The Army lowered TI. Is that a bad word now, lower TI? Is it tactical network? I'll say tactical network.
We still use it. It's still understood.
Okay. And you've already alluded to this. One of the most complicated systems challenges you can see in the DoD.
Yeah.
I know it's a really hard problem. And I'm going to say that so you don't hate me when I ask my question, because I know how hard a problem it is. And it sounds like the SU gets to some of that in operations and helps us get that COP of what's going on, which is terrific. I'm going to pull you back earlier into the acquisition processes, and especially T&E, and especially cyber T&E, okay? So I know, you've got Net Warrior and JVCP and the tactical radios and leader radio and Manpack and WinT and blah, blah, blah. And they all have their own processes for cyber tabletops and vulnerability identifications and assessments and adversarial assessments. And that's all part of the acquisition process. All important, and I know you're doing a great job.
Yep. I'm trying.
How does C3T, or the Army in general writ large, look at the systems of systems in that context in support of acquisition and test?
Yeah. From the cyber threat standpoint. Okay, I'll take a whack at that. Big question. So some of what, there's a few things that I think facilitate us in forcing us to work better together in that kind of environment, particularly in cyber. Some of that is just the assignment of responsibilities from the COE Technical Advisory Board has actually given responsibility for some of the cyber elements to particular programs. So there's a formal declaration that says this program is doing this for the Tactical Army, which will say, y'all got to come to this table to play. So I'll use as an example the Tactical PKI. We're not going to have every program out there in the United States Army coming up with their own version of PKI. They're all going to come, and it's going to be one version of PKI fielded by the identified program, which happens to be mine. So, and we're going to do this, and it's going to be in policy. It's going to be enforced through acquisition. So that's a good example of one of the unifying things that we can do. I think the other thing, strangely, that helps us from a policy standpoint was, and I hate to say this, the transition from DIACAP to risk management framework. We don't like risk management framework. It's hard and it's detailed and a lot of stuff, but what it does do is allow us to have the conversation among programs to say, hey, I'm going to be on your network. Can I inherit certain controls from you for my system? Because if they inherit those controls, that means they're not implementing their own to get after the same thing, which makes us, less disparate in what we're doing. So we're still fumbling our way through that, and that process is fine-tuning, but we're having a lot more of those conversations. And it's simply that it's more of a focus. Now, in the test community, the T&E community, I think a lot of this is new, right? We do really great red teaming. We do really great red teaming, but what is the next piece of that? So the remediation piece, like we did the red teams. So the NDAA 1647 that does require us to do the cyber tabletops is a good forcing function. I can tell you that what it's forced us as a program to do is to actually enlist external agencies like Johns Hopkins and Carnegie Mellon to do external assessments on us, and we have made our network better because of it. They pointed something out, and we've gotten and hardened it and taken care of those vulnerabilities. So I think probably opening ourselves up to have everybody's got to not be scared to let people look under our skirts to identify where we have problems, right? That's part of it, too, is not being like this. Programs tend to love to be erasable and can't. So I think I hit on a couple of things that are helping. Okay.
Thanks, Shannon. So I wrote down 2 key words that you said. System, well, actually it's 3 words. System of systems, right? Okay, so I'm going to try to get there. So we have what's called integrated tactical network, right? The network does not work alone. The applications do not work alone, and the data does not work alone. So, for example, we were out at NIE at Fort Bliss at 18.2, which was last November, and we were testing the integrated tactical network, and there was 3 program executive offices there. So although we were testing maybe a very specific portion of what happens on the network, which was really the dismounted soldiers, we had 3 PEOs there because you had the network there, you had the applications there, you had and you had a variety of other people there, right? So ATEC was there, DOT&E was there, our testing partners were there. We did a customer-funded cyber and electronic warfare test, and it was integrated because nothing works alone. Right? So I would say that the senior leadership that we have in the Army at this point in time, to me, is phenomenal. I mean, they get along, they talk to each other. They're like, hey, I'm taking out, my Android kit, and I need the network to be there, and I need SATCOM, and we all pull together and we do it. So it was a great test, and it was an early look at how all of this stuff needs to get integrated. And because of that, we started to look at the way we deliver 2 units as an Army, and that's why we came up with capability sets, right? Because we need our partners to move with us at a specific point in time. And so just even next week, we're going through preliminary design reviews of what capability set 21 looks like for the network. Because we have to make sure that the network can support a lot of these capabilities that our sister PEOs want to put onto the network. So whether we're putting, augmented reality and we need the network, we've got to test that together, right? We can have a PM that's going to bring cyber tools. Well, I don't know how that's going to clog the network up when we've got to make sure we've got quality of service. So we are really making a concerted effort not to take eaches out to the field, and if we do, we need to test that in the context of what the network really looks like. So I think we've most recently have proven that we do work together, and we are really moving towards the integrated tactical network. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions? Going once? I think we got one.
So some of us will probably have some degree of skepticism on exactly how integrated things are, but thank you for that overview. One question, though, that's separate, that gets down more to the tactical level that I'm interested on. Can you give me your sense of where tactical level commanders like brigade and lower, or even at the division level, where their view is in terms of incorporating cyber in? Or not just cyber, because I don't want that to sound too restrictive, but for example, somebody who was a green suitor, okay, I know that a commander is going to have that understanding of EWO if we're talking about IDs, right? Is that commander now going to have an understanding of, okay, here's what my tactical network is right now, am I monitoring the threats, or is it just kind of the classic, hey, SIGO, my network's not working, my laptop needs to be reimaged kind of thing, or why can't I get enough land drops, right? Where do you see that now, and where do you see it kind of going in the future? How do you plan to address that?
You can talk about it.
That's a great question, and that's kind of what the vision is of Cyber-SU is. Right now, today, it's currently as you described. They're going to go to the staff and they're going to go to their subject matter experts and talk to them. In the future, one of the challenges that I did discuss with the Cyber-SU is trying to get some level of a cyber overlay, so to speak, onto the commander's COP that would have meaning. Again, when you just heard all the complexities of integration, and when there's a problem that's going to impact a warfighting function, we would like. What Cyber-SU should inform the commander on is what's that problem. So there's a balancing act, right? We don't want to feed You can imagine building a product where there's a bunch of alerts popping up on the commander's dashboard. It's just going to be useless. And that is our largest challenge when we start talking about Cyber-SU is what is that information that the commander that would help the commander in a decision as part of the decision cycle.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to pile into that because I am a SIGO. I'm still a National Guard signal officer. Been there, done that a few times overseas. And you're absolutely right. Like, typically commanders don't really care about what's going on in the network. They're just like, hey, my nipper works or it doesn't, fix it, SIGO. I got it. So what we have to do is, listen, the commander's never going to understand the details of electronic warfare and, what's going on networks and all that kind of stuff. So we have to put it in commander speak, right? You have to say, when X happens, this is what it does to your mission. Make it relevant to him. And that's what we're really trying to figure out, is how we take those things that are going to degrade missions or inhibit them or are big threats, and explain that to him in language that he understands, and say, X happens when this. So, and then, lay out that there is a decision point to be made, right? And maybe that decision point is just, you turn off this transmission system and go that way. It could be simple as that, or it could be, I got to move because this entire area is jammed. Those types of things. But it is a challenge because they got to start caring about things they didn't traditionally care about before. So, okay.
So I'll pile on to that too. So last year at Cyber Blitz at Fort Dix, we had 25th ID come in and do the experiment with us, where we created a scenario of a cyber threat of a certain nation, and we actually took that threat from something that actually happened. And honestly, we had a CEMA cell that looked at what was happening on the network in terms of threat spectrum. He worked with the NetOps folks, and he built this picture out and he fed it to the cop, right? And the command, and really we were just looking at how did that impact the mission, and that was told to the commander. So this is not meant to be, Cyber-SU is not meant to be a commander's tool. It's meant to be a tool for the CEMA cell and the CEMA work group. So having said that, at the schoolhouse at Fort Gordon, the Cyber Center of Excellence, EWOs are being trained on cyber, right? There's a lot of cross-training that's starting to happen because we don't have the force structure to send out a specialist every time we go out on missions, right? So we're trying to the schoolhouse is set up to cross-train on DCO, NetOps. We even have the OCO guys learning DCO and vice versa, right? So I would say that the commanders are starting to rely more on what we do have in the cell in their training, as well as remote defenders, right? So we've got the cyber mission force, we've got cyber protection brigades, and they are not co-located with the teams unless we have a special mission that they need to be. So there's a lot of reach back that happens as well, right? So I think taking, the simplistic form is really taking the burden off of what the users are doing and trying to make it as simple as they can. But we don't really have the force structure as an Army to have specialists to do, I think, everything that we probably need them to do. But we are trying to combine some of those tasks and make it more manageable. And we need to talk about you being a little bit more optimistic about our integration efforts here. Hey, you know what? We're trying.
All right, any other last questions here? Go ahead, sir.
I don't know if you can share with the way or getting the signals of the electromagnetic area, and particularly if that is kind of massive electromagnetic pulse or impact, and how to get that signal and what is the kind of a trend you can see to capture and getting to the realistic for not only military situation but also the civilian critical infrastructure, so that your capability or signal or information can be shared more.
Okay, yeah, how that information can be shared so that we can, yeah. So again, and I think Portia mentioned it, we have policy and we have classification of information boundaries that we have to cross all the time with this stuff. And that's, I mean, we struggle with that down at the lowest levels and we struggle with that at the national level. So I think you've just highlighted a very hard problem that I'm not really sure how we do get after that. I agree. It's a challenge. Yeah, and you know, that is a lot of that are the things that Cyber-SU is supposed to take into account, which is not just, you know, what's going on our environment, but what's going on in the outside environment and how those things cross communicate where they need to. I mean, do you have anything else to?
Yeah, I mean, I made it through this whole time period without saying the words analytics or machine learning or anything. But I mean, at some point we would have to investigate some sort of analytic or something that would help inform on which information would be shared and what is that key information. I don't know if that exactly answers your questions, because I think that's a loaded question, and it would have to get into some very specific use cases in order to talk through what that would mean.
All right, we still got a few minutes left, so I'll take one opportunity, a little self-plug here. For anyone interested, there will be a technical exchange meeting in Nashville, Tennessee on the 30th of May that will cover air-ground integration. So as Portia kind of laid out the Army's lines of effort, so this is our third technical exchange meeting to kind of get after those lines of effort, this one focusing specifically on air-ground integration. So for anyone in kind of those lanes, that will be coming up. There's information on FBO for that. But so I'll just like to thank our panel here. And again, we do have a couple minutes, so feel free to come on up. And they're the experts, not me. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin. That was fun.
Right. I'm going to stand.
How do we do? Good. Yeah? Hey, we had a pretty good turnout. Hi, how are you? Hi, yes, Kevin, how are you? Yes, I'm in it. Yes, I am. Yes.
I know you reached out to me
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think Ken Malone was trying to talk with you.
Excellent.
He asked me to send out information in that case.
Okay.
I'm still